The morning sun barely broke through the gray haze, casting long shadows over the cul-de-sac where Karen's silver SUV sat, smugly parked across my driveway. Again, for the third time this week. My hands tightened around my coffee mug, the ceramic hot against my palms, as I stood on my porch, staring at the vehicle that had become the bane of my existence. Why does she keep doing this? I wondered, my pulse quickening with a mix of frustration and disbelief. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the distant hum of a lawnmower, but inside me, a storm was brewing. I'd asked her politely, twice, to stop. I'd left notes. I'd even spoken to the HOA, but Karen, with her perfectly manicured nails and her self-righteous smirk, didn't care. She'd shrug, toss her blonde hair, and say, "It's just a few hours, Tom. Relax." Relax? How do you relax when someone's car traps you in your own home, day after day, like a taunt? I stepped off the porch, my sneakers crunching against the gravel, and approached the SUV. Its gleaming chrome mocked me, parked at an angle that screamed entitlement. I glanced at the dashboard through the window. No note, no apology, just a half-empty latte cup sitting there like a trophy of her indifference. My jaw clenched. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about respect, about boundaries, about the principle of it all. I wasn't going to let Karen walk all over me again. Not today. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the tow company's number, but something stopped me. Towing her car would be satisfying, sure, but she'd just pay the fine, laugh it off, and park here again tomorrow. No, I needed something bigger, something that would make her feel the weight of her actions. I turned back to my house, my mind racing. The cul-de-sac was a small, tight-knit community, or at least it had been before Karen moved in 6 months ago. She'd swept in with her designer sunglasses and her loud yoga retreats, turning our quiet street into her personal stage. She'd park wherever she wanted, host parties that shook the windows, and once even reported my dog for excessive barking when he'd barely yipped. The HOA, spineless as ever, did nothing. "She's just settling in," they'd say. Settling in? She was a hurricane, and I was done being collateral damage. I walked back inside, the gears in my head turning. Karen wanted to play games? Fine, I'd play, but this time I'd win. By noon, I had a plan. It wasn't just about moving her car. It was about making a statement. I called my buddy Mike, who owned a small auto shop on the edge of town. "You still got that flatbed truck?" I asked, keeping my voice low, as if Karen could somehow hear me through the walls. Mike chuckled, sensing the edge of my tone. "What's Karen done now?" he asked. I told him about the SUV, about the weeks of frustration, about the HOA's uselessness. "I need her car gone," I said. "Not towed. Gone." Mike paused, then laughed. "You're serious, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He told me to meet him at dusk, when the cul-de-sac would be quiet, and Karen would be too busy blasting her meditation music to notice. As the day wore on, I watched her from my kitchen window. She strutted out to her SUV, tossed a yoga mat in the back, and drove off, leaving my driveway clear for the first time in days. But I knew she'd be back. She always came back. I spent the afternoon pacing, second-guessing myself. Was this too far? Was I becoming the bad guy here? But then I remembered the time she'd laughed in my face when I asked her to move her car, the way she'd said, "Maybe you should get a smaller driveway, Tom." No, I wasn't a villain. I was just a man pushed too far. Dusk fell, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Mike's flatbed truck rumbled into the cul-de-sac, its headlights dimmed. I met him at the curb, my heart pounding. "You sure about this?" he asked, scratching his beard. I nodded, my eyes fixed on Karen's house. Her lights were on, and the faint thump of bass vibrated through the air. Perfect. She wouldn't hear a thing. Mike backed the truck up to her SUV, and we worked quickly, silently. The tow hook latched on her car with a satisfying clank. I held my breath as the vehicle lifted, its tires dangling like a defeated beast. In minutes, it was loaded onto the flatbed, and Mike drove off into the night. I stood there, staring at the empty spot where her car had been, a strange mix of triumph and unease settling in my chest. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Karen's voice, shrill and panicked. "Where's my car?" she screamed, standing in the middle of the cul-de-sac, her phone pressed to her ear. I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee, trying to keep my face neutral. She spun around, her eyes landing on me. "Tom!" she barked, storming toward me. "Did you see anything? Someone stole my car." I shrugged, my voice calm. "Maybe you parked it somewhere else, Karen." Her face reddened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "This isn't funny. I'm calling the police." I nodded, unfazed. "Good idea. Let me know how that goes." She stormed off, muttering curses, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen's fury was a spectacle. By mid-morning, a police cruiser rolled into the cul-de-sac, its lights flashing lazily. Karen stood beside it, gesturing wildly, her voice carrying over the neatly trimmed lawns. I watched from my living room, the curtains slightly parted as she pointed at my house, then at the empty spot where her SUV had been. The officer, a tired-looking man with a notepad, scribbled something down, his expression bored. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could imagine Karen's version of events. The perfect neighbor, victimized by a mysterious car thief, probably blaming me in some roundabout way. I smirked, but my stomach twisted. Had I covered my tracks? Mike had promised to stash the car in his shop, out of sight. But what if someone had seen us? What if Karen had a dash cam I hadn't noticed? I shook off the doubt. The plan was solid. Mike's shop was on a dead-end road, far from prying eyes, and he'd sworn to keep the car under wraps until I figured out the next step. I wasn't going to keep it forever, just long enough to teach her a lesson. I sipped my coffee, now cold, and tried to focus on the newspaper in front of me. But my eyes kept drifting to the window, to the unfolding drama outside. The officer walked toward my house, Karen trailing behind, her arms crossed and her lips pursed. I took a deep breath and opened the door before he could knock. "Morning, officer," I said, my tone polite, almost cheerful. "Something wrong?" The officer, whose badge read Martinez, glanced at his notepad. "Mr. Harper? Your neighbor, Ms. Thompson, reported her vehicle stolen. Says it was parked in front of your driveway last night. You see anything unusual?" I shook my head, keeping my expression neutral. "Nope. I went to bed early. Didn't hear a thing." Karen's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "That's convenient, Tom. You've been complaining about my car for weeks." I raised an eyebrow, meeting her gaze. "Karen, I've asked you to stop blocking my driveway, sure. But I don't steal cars. Maybe you should check with your yoga friends. One of them might have borrowed it." Her face flushed, but Officer Martinez raised a hand, cutting her off. "We'll look into it, Ms. Thompson. Mr. Harper, if you think of anything, give us a call." He handed me his card, and they walked back to the cruiser. As soon as they were out of sight, I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart racing. I dodged the first bullet, but Karen wasn't going to let this go. She was relentless, like a dog with a bone, and I knew she'd dig until she found something or someone to blame. I needed to stay one step ahead. I grabbed my keys and drove to Mike's shop, the morning sun glaring through my windshield. The shop was a squat, brick building surrounded by a chain-link fence, cluttered with old tires and rusted car parts. Mike was waiting for me, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "She's in the back," he said, nodding toward a tarp-covered shape in the corner of the lot. I peeked under the tarp, and there it was, Karen's SUV, untouched, gleaming even in the dim light. "No one's been sniffing around," Mike said, "but you got to figure out what's next, man. This is crazy, even for you." I nodded, my mind already spinning. The plan had been simple. Take the car, let Karen sweat, then find it somewhere random, like a parking lot across town, with a note telling her to stay out of my driveway. But now, with the police involved, things were getting complicated. I couldn't just drop the car somewhere without risking questions. I needed to make it look like someone else had taken it. Someone who wasn't me. That's when the idea hit me, a twist that made my pulse quicken. Karen wasn't the only one causing trouble in the neighborhood. There was Jake, the guy 2 streets over, who'd been feuding with her over her late-night parties. He complained at the last HOA meeting, loud enough for everyone to hear, about her disrespectful behavior. What if I made it look like Jake was behind this? I spent the rest of the day laying the groundwork. I drove to a gas station, bought a burner phone with cash, and sent an anonymous tip to the police claiming I'd seen a guy matching Jake's description near Karen's car last night. It was a long shot, but it might throw her off my trail. Then I went home and waited, keeping an eye on her house. By evening, she was back outside, pacing, her phone glued to her ear. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Karen was a pain, sure, but was I going too far? I pushed the thought away. She'd brought this on herself. If she'd just parked somewhere else, none of this would have happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump, half expecting the police to knock on my door. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Cops just drove by the shop. Stay sharp. My stomach dropped. Had Karen figured it out? Or was it just a routine patrol? I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. This wasn't just a prank anymore. It was a game of cat and mouse, and I wasn't sure I was the cat. The next day, the cul-de-sac buzzed with tension. Karen's voice echoed through the morning air as she stood on her lawn, ranting to a small crowd of neighbors. I caught snippets from my porch, words like thief and justice and ominously my name. She was building a case, rallying the neighborhood against me. I kept my distance, pretending to water my plants, but my ears were tuned to every word. Tom's been obsessed with my car, she said, her voice dripping with accusation. He's probably behind this. The neighbors murmured, some nodding, others looking skeptical. I felt a chill. Karen was smarter than I'd given her credit for. She wasn't just angry. She was strategic, turning the court of public opinion against me. I needed to act fast. The anonymous tip about Jake had been a gamble, but I had no idea if the police had taken it seriously. I drove to Mike's shop again, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. When I got there, Mike was pacing outside, his face grim. Bad news, he said, before I could even get out of the car. Karen's been asking around town. She came by earlier, sniffing around, asking if I'd seen her SUV. I played dumb, but she's not buying it. My heart sank. Karen was closing in, and I'd underestimated her tenacity. What did you tell her? I asked, my voice low. Mike shrugged, told her I don't keep track of every car in town. But she's got a nose for trouble, Tom. You got to move that car soon, or we're both screwed. I nodded, my mind racing. The original plan, dumping the car somewhere random, was too risky now. Karen was watching, the police were circling, and Jake hadn't taken the bait, as I'd hoped. I needed a new angle, something to throw everyone off. That's when I remembered the old quarry on the outskirts of town, a sprawling, abandoned pit surrounded by dense woods. It was the perfect place to hide a car, at least for a while. Can you move it to the quarry? I asked Mike. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Tonight, he said. But after this, you're on your own. That afternoon, I kept busy trying to act normal. I mowed my lawn, chatted with a neighbor about the weather, and avoided Karen's house like the plague. But around dusk, everything changed. I was in my garage, organizing tools, when I heard tires crunching on the street. I peeked out and saw Jake's pickup truck pulling into Karen's driveway. My stomach twisted. Jake, a burly guy with a temper, got out and stormed toward her door, his face red. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their gestures were heated, arms waving, voices rising. Had the police tipped him off about my anonymous call? Or had Karen confronted him herself? Either way, this was bad. If Jake suspected me, the whole plan could unravel. I ducked back into the garage, my pulse hammering. This was the twist I hadn't seen coming. Jake wasn't just a convenient scapegoat. He was a wild card. I grabbed my phone and texted Mike, hold off on the quarry. Trouble brewing. He didn't reply, which only made my nerves worse. I needed to know what Jake and Karen were talking about. I slipped out the back door, keeping low, and crept along the hedge separating my yard from hers. Their voices grew clearer as I got closer. I didn't touch your damn car. Jake shouted. You're the one who's been a nightmare to live near. Karen fired back, her voice sharp as a blade. Don't lie to me, Jake. Someone saw you near my house last night. My breath caught. My tip had worked too well. Jake was furious, and Karen was pointing fingers, but neither of them had proof. Yet, I retreated to my house, my mind a whirlwind. This was spiraling out of control. If Jake and Karen started digging, they might figure out the truth. I needed to end this fast. I called Mike again, telling him to move the car to the quarry tonight. No delays. Make it look like it's been there for days, I said. Mess it up a bit. Mud, leaves, whatever. Mike grunted. You owe me big for this, Tom. I didn't argue. I spent the rest of the evening watching Karen's house, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Done. Cars at the quarry. Good luck. I exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. The game wasn't over yet. The quarry plan was in motion, but the tension in the cul-de-sac was thicker than ever. By morning, Karen had escalated her campaign. A group of neighbors gathered outside her house, whispering and casting glances my way. I stayed inside, pretending to read, but my eyes kept darting to the window. Karen was handing out flyers, actual flyers, asking for information about her stolen SUV, offering a reward. She'd turned this into a neighborhood crusade, and I was public enemy number one. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I know what you did, Tom. Meet me at the park at 3, or I go to the cops. My blood ran cold. Who is this? Jake? Karen? Someone else entirely? I stared at the message, my mind racing through possibilities. Had someone seen Mike's truck? Was there a camera I'd missed? I decided to go to the park. Not because I was scared, though I was, but because I needed to know who I was dealing with. At 3 p.m., I sat on a bench under a sprawling oak, the autumn leaves crunching under my feet. The park was quiet, save for a few kids playing in the distance. Then I saw her, Mrs. Delaney, the nosy retiree from across the street. She shuffled toward me, her eyes sharp despite her frail frame. Tom, she said, her voice low, I saw you in that truck last night. Don't deny it. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face blank. Mrs. Delaney, I don't know what you're talking about. She smirked, leaning closer. I'm old, not blind. I know you took Karen's car. I don't blame you. She's a menace. But I want in. In? My mind reeled. Was she blackmailing me? Mrs. Delaney explained she'd had her own run-ins with Karen, something about a property line dispute, and she wanted to see her taken down a peg. I'll keep quiet, she said, but only if you let me help. I can make sure Karen stays distracted. I didn't trust her, but I didn't have a choice. Fine, I said, but you don't tell anyone, and you don't ask questions. She nodded, her eyes gleaming with mischief. I left the park feeling like I'd just made a deal with the devil. Mrs. Delaney was a wild card, just like Jake, and I was running out of room to maneuver. That evening, I drove to the quarry to check on the car. The place was desolate, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth. Karen's SUV sat under a cluster of trees, covered in mud and leaves as I'd instructed. It looked like it had been abandoned for weeks. I nodded, satisfied, but my nerves were still on edge. Mrs. Delaney's involvement was a complication I hadn't planned for, and Jake's confrontation with Karen was still fresh in my mind. I needed to tie up loose ends. I called Mike, asking him to keep an eye on the shop in case Karen came snooping again. I'm done, Tom, he said, his voice tired. This is too much heat. Get that car back to her or I'm out. I hung up, frustrated. Everyone was turning on me. Back home, the cul-de-sac was quiet, but the calm felt deceptive. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was closing in. Around 9 p.m., I saw her car, a rental, I assumed, pull into her driveway. She got out, her face pale, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. She looked genuinely shaken, not the confident, smug Karen I was used to. Had I gone too far? I pushed the thought away. She'd made my life hell for months. This was justice. But as I watched her disappear into her house, I couldn't help but wonder if I was the one who'd end up paying the price. The next morning, everything unraveled. I woke to the sound of sirens, sharp and piercing, cutting through the dawn. I bolted to the window and saw 2 police cruisers parked in front of Karen's house. My heart pounded as I watched Officer Martinez and another cop talking to her on her porch. She was gesturing wildly, pointing toward the street, her face a mix of fury and triumph. Had they found the car? Had Mrs. Delaney betrayed me? I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and texted Mike, "Cops at Karen's. What's happening?" No response. I cursed under my breath and threw on a jacket, my mind racing. I needed to stay calm, act normal, but every instinct screamed to run. I stepped outside, pretending to check my mailbox, and caught Karen's eye. She stormed toward me, the officers trailing behind. "They found it, Tom," she shouted, her voice dripping with venom. "My car was in the quarry, covered in mud, just like you wanted." I froze, my mouth dry. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but my voice sounded weak, unconvincing. Officer Martinez stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Harper, we got a tip this morning. Someone saw a flatbed truck moving a vehicle to the quarry 2 nights ago. Sound familiar?" My mind flashed to Mike. Had he sold me out? Or was it Mrs. Delaney playing both sides? Before I could respond, Mrs. Delaney herself appeared, hobbling across the street with a look of feigned concern. "Oh, Tom, what's all this about?" she asked, her voice sugary sweet. I shot her a glare, but she just smiled, her eyes glinting with something dangerous. Karen turned on her, oblivious. "Mrs. Delaney, you said you saw someone near my house that night. Was it Tom?" Mrs. Delaney hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm not sure, dear. My eyes aren't what they used to be." I exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. Martinez wasn't buying it. "We're going to need you to come down to the station, Mr. Harper, just to answer some questions." At the station, I sat in a cold, gray room, my hands clasped tightly to keep them from shaking. Martinez sat across from me, his notepad open, his pen tapping rhythmically. "Let's cut to the chase," he said. "We know you had a problem with Miss Thompson's parking. We know a flatbed truck was involved, and we know you've got a friend who owns one. You want to tell me your side before this gets messy?" I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling for a way out. I could deny everything, but the evidence was piling up. The anonymous tip about Jake hadn't worked, and now Mrs. Delaney's cryptic games were making things worse. I took a deep breath and leaned forward. "Officer, I didn't steal her car. I don't know who did, but I'll help you figure it out." It was a desperate move, but I needed time. Martinez raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. They let me go, with a warning to stay in town. When I got home, Karen was waiting on my porch, her arms crossed. "This isn't over, Tom," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I know it was you, and I'm going to prove it." I didn't respond, just brushed past her and locked my door. Inside, I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. The plan had been perfect, simple, clean, satisfying. Now it was a house of cards collapsing around me. The collapse came faster than I expected. That evening, Mike called, his voice frantic. "They found a car, Tom. Cops showed up at the quarry, took pictures, the whole deal. Someone tipped them off, and it wasn't me." My heart sank. Mrs. Delaney. It had to be her. She played me, stringing me along while feeding information to the police. I hung up and paced my living room, the walls closing in. I'd been so focused on outsmarting Karen that I hadn't seen the bigger threat. Mrs. Delaney, the quiet observer who'd been watching the whole neighborhood like a hawk. I needed to confront her, but first, I had to get to Mike. I drove to his shop, the night air cool against my face. When I arrived, Mike was outside, smoking a cigarette, his hands shaking. "This is bad, man," he said. "They're asking about my truck. If they trace it back to me, I'm done." I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. "They won't. Just stick to the story. You don't know anything. I'll handle the rest." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. The noose was tightening, and I was running out of moves. Back home, I knocked on Mrs. Delaney's door. She answered, her face a mask of innocence. "Tom, dear, what's wrong?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "You tipped off the cops, didn't you?" Her smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "I told you I wanted in," she said. "But you didn't listen. Karen's not the only one who's tired of your games." My blood ran cold. "What do you want?" I asked. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "I want you to admit what you did. To Karen. To the neighborhood. Or I tell the police everything." I stared at her, stunned. This wasn't about Karen anymore. It was about power. I walked away, my mind reeling. I couldn't confess. Not yet. But I couldn't let Mrs. Delaney hold this over me either. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter anonymous, addressed to the HOA. In it, I detailed Karen's parking violations, her parties, her disregard for the neighborhood, but I also admitted to moving her car. Not stealing, just moving. I claimed it was a prank gone wrong, a moment of frustration. I mailed it from a postbox across town, hoping it would shift the narrative, make me look less like a criminal and more like a fed-up neighbor. The next day, the letter hit like a bomb. The HOA called an emergency meeting, and Karen was the center of attention, not me. Neighbors whispered about her behavior, her entitlement, her disregard for the rules. For the first time, Karen looked shaken, her confidence crumbling. But Mrs. Delaney was there too, watching me from across the room, her eyes like daggers. I knew she wasn't done with me. The police were still investigating, and my confession, however vague, had put me back in their sights. The fallout was brutal, but it wasn't the end. The HOA meeting had shifted the spotlight onto Karen, but it hadn't cleared me. The police called me in again, this time with more questions about the letter. I stuck to my story, a prank, not theft, driven by months of frustration. They didn't buy it entirely, but without hard evidence, no fingerprints, no witnesses beyond Mrs. Delaney's vague claims, they couldn't charge me. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. The neighborhood had turned on her, tired of her antics, and she'd become a pariah. Her SUV was back in her driveway, scratched and muddy, a constant reminder of her defeat. But I wasn't celebrating. Mrs. Delaney's betrayal had left a bitter taste, and I couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at me. I'd wanted justice, not chaos. I'd wanted Karen to learn a lesson, not to destroy her. One evening, I saw her sitting on her porch, her face buried in her hands. For the first time, she looked human, not the monster I'd made her out to be. I walked over, my heart heavy. "Karen," I said, my voice soft. She looked up, her eyes red. "What do you want, Tom?" I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry. I moved your car. It was stupid, and I went too far." She stared at me, stunned, then nodded slowly. "You're an idiot," she said, but there was no venom in her voice. We talked for an hour, not as enemies, but as neighbors. She admitted she'd been reckless, parking wherever she wanted, ignoring the rules. I admitted I'd let my anger get the better of me. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a start. The next day, I went to Mrs. Delaney's house and thanked her, oddly enough. Her meddling had forced me to face what I'd done, to own up to it. She just smiled, that same mischievous glint in her eye. Sometimes, Tom, people need a push to do the right thing. The cul-de-sac settled back into its quiet rhythm. Karen started parking in her own driveway, and the HOA tightened its rules thanks to the letter. I never heard from the police again, and Mike, relieved, went back to his shop, swearing never to help me with another crazy plan. I learned something, though. Revenge feels good in the moment, but it's a fire that burns everyone. Next time, I talk first, act later. Maybe that's what being a neighbor is about. Not winning, but finding a way to live together, flaws and all.